What's up, everyone? Welcome in. The preseason is behind us. The regular season is coming. I've spread some sage all over the place, and let's talk Celtics basketball with Brian, Robb, Evan, Valenti. I am Adam Kaufman. Thank you. Welcome in. Happy early holidays, and hopefully you're enjoying a nice restful break before the new year comes around, obviously. How you fellas doing?
Hanging in.
Excited for some regular season basketball here.
Yeah, just a few days away. Of course, today, as I mentioned, Sunday. Who knows when you're listening to it? Maybe it's even later in the week than that at this point. But the games begin on Wednesday. The Celtics' first action after an 0-2 preseason that, let's be honest, we know how preseason works, regardless of the sport or team you root for. Wins, losses, those don't matter. It's flow of the game and indications of how individuals do and trends and things like that you try and decipher and that actually matter. And in this particular case, it's hard, Rob, to get a gauge on this team right now. Evan and I were talking about this off air, and it's nothing you haven't thought about, obviously. Just the fact that, hey, Kemba Walker, he's hurt. He's not going to be ready for the start of the regular season either, but he didn't play in either of these preseason games. Neither Tristan Thompson, who was their big free agent acquisition. Romeo Langford is sidelined. That's a guy that down the road could be part of the rotation as well. So it's hard to really examine where they're at with the regular season coming up.
No question. And on top of all that, you have a super condensed training camp. Mm-hmm. So that leaves you just 2 preseason games to work with footage. And that opens up. So you don't, and then with like guy like Tristan Thompson now, you don't see the combinations you'd want to see heading into the regular season. So factor that in with obviously the team's core had a very long run during last year's season. So they are in a very quick turnaround. And from an energy standpoint in the preseason, they clearly weren't there yet. So how do you evaluate that? How much credit do you give those guys being like, okay, they're going to obviously turn it on when they need to turn it on versus, Gordon Hayward's gone, Kemba Walker's gone. Like the shots are going to be, the easy looks are not going to be as easy to come by this year. So balancing all that into play, like you guys said, like it's really tough to get a great read on where this team is at. But there's no mistake. Like they weren't in. Brad Stevens isn't happy after the preseason, and it's hard to blame him.
Is there something that you've watched so far that you have seen that you can make some heads or tails out of that worries you? Just that one big concern going into the season that goes beyond injury.
Yeah, I mean, I think a clear one is what happens when Jayson Tatum's on the bench to the offense, because last year, the Tatum plus bench unit was very successful, and that meant when that happened, you could pile up 3 starters together, Smart, Brown. I mean, Smart was coming off the bench half the time, but Smart, Brown, Hayward, Kemba, and then that would be obviously a pretty good unit too. Now 2 of those guys are not around for the start of the season, and Kemba and Hayward, obviously. So the Smart, Jaylen Brown, and other guy minutes have not gone great, and they're not going to go great if those guys aren't hitting shots. So I think that is going to be an issue this year, and you have to, I think, the coaching staff is going to be doing plenty of mixing and matching to see who can kind of fit around those guys and make those minutes where the team can hold its own for the 12 or 15 minutes a game that Tatum's on the bench. But it's those are going to be critical because I think, you don't take anything out of a preseason game, but I think the plus minus splits in those 2 preseason games with Tatum on and off the bench were not good.
Yeah, I think Tatum was like, Grandy had it. So if you want to fact check me, go ahead. But Tatum on the floor was the only reason why the Celtics were plus anything in any of the 2 preseason games. So to echo your sentiment here, Rob, it's not pretty when Tatum goes to the bench and you look around at this team and, with no Kemba, where does the relief come? Is it going to be a Jeff Teague? And Teague I thought was pretty great. And Adam, our last show was all over the Teague acquisition. He's actually been all over ever since that was official, quote unquote. But if you're relying on Jeff Teague and maybe a little Peyton Pritchard here and there and Marcus Smart to get hot at some point, like there's a little bit of a concern in terms of what you can produce off the bench, when your star player goes out. And for me, Brian, you got to look to Jaylen Brown and say, hey, like this is your time here. Like this is a time where you need to be aggressive and to hunt your shots and get to the places on the floor where you think you're the most comfortable. And this is, I think, an area in which, for Brown, it's a little uncharted waters here, Brian. If I'm I'm a little concerned about, although Brown's been able to be one of the more consistent players over the past couple of years. This is a point where Jaylen Brown being the offensive focal point is going to be needed here.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. Just the margin of error is down for him this year, and that can be. It's good. He's going to get more opportunity, which he has shown he deserves based on how he's performed, especially in the postseason last year. But at the same time, like, defenses are going to be keying in on him more, and he's not going to have Hayward or Kemba setting him up as much. So that's going to make life tougher for him. And so I know there's areas of his game he needs to, or he said he wants to work on this offseason including becoming a better distributor himself. Because I think you look at his assist rate, it is not good in his career. That's probably his weakest spot in the offensive end. So there's a lot of room for growth there if they want to, they threw him in the pick and roll and have him handling the ball more. And he's gotten a lot better there, but he still has a long way to go on that front. So that's definitely, I agree with it. And that's a huge area to watch so far. And it's going to, it's not going to make or break the team, but it's going to certainly make or break how the team does on certain nights.
Boy, there was some obsession going on social media watching those games, though, with Jaylen Brown's passing, as if he had just, turned some ridiculous corner
there was
a few months ago playing in the bubble to where he's at now.
It was just that one pass, the one dump off pass to Rob Williams. It was one pass. It was it. And the whole internet went nuts. It's like, oh, cool. Like, yeah, we never saw Jaylen do that ever before, but he's going to have to do a lot more of that if they're going to be really successful.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. You need to doing things once in a preseason game, great, but doing it again and doing it without turning the ball over on the two other possessions, you're running the pick and roll. That's what's going to be the key here. So, I mean, they're gonna have to find that out. It might be a situation where he's just not ready for that. And, you can feature him in plenty of other ways. Obviously he's very valuable off the ball and, driving to the hoop, but you also have to be careful just not to ask too much out of him too, because that's when you get some, too much ISO and then some ugly shooting nights.
I'm trying to think of the right way to ask this question when it relates to young players with high expectations in the league, like obviously Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. I mean, these guys have, save for year two for Tatum, when everyone, started to panic a little bit and say he had leveled off or whatever it was. And then obviously takes that next big leap last year. People are reaffirmed in the whole he can be and should be a superstar, will be, whatever it is. And Brown has shown incremental growth throughout his career, where he could have been an all-star last year. Didn't pan out. The numbers worked against him, but absolutely you view him as a potential perennial all-star if all goes well. These are still young guys. And so something we talked about with Mark Murphy last week was, when is the appropriate time? Is now the appropriate time to really get nitpicky with these guys, to say that, okay, on a given night, these guys need to be better because it is their team now. They are the leaders of the team. In years past, I don't think we rightfully focused a lot of attention on the fact that they're like anybody else, were other aspects to their lives than basketball, right? I mean, Tatum has Deuce. He's got a young child. There's no there's no grazing over that. Having a kid, especially as a young professional who's trying to better his game, that's a challenge, a good challenge, and plenty of people have it, but it is a challenge. Brown clearly is mature beyond his years, and he's taken a role within the NBAPA or NBPA, and obviously away from that, and in other charitable causes, and obviously social justice initiatives, and so many things are important to him, as they should be, outside of basketball. At what point in time do these guys, if there isn't that continued incremental growth, do you start to say, okay, is basketball enough of a priority? Do you know what I'm asking? And trying not to be offensive in the way that I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's a situation where they're both young, so there's going to be a learning curve for both on the floor. So I don't think either guy is at a point where you worry about any stuff with them off the court at all yet, because the growth has been so great, and there's no reasonable stop. And even this year, I don't think, if Tatum struggled like he did 2 years ago at the beginning of the year, or Brown I think Brown had a terrible shooting start to that same year too, when he got benched eventually 20 games in the year. Like, it's going to be a lot harder this year for them because look at the roster around them. And it's going to be as simple as that. Like, when you look at what they're doing, and the hope, obviously, from the Celtics standpoint, is that they're going to get more opportunity. They're going to keep growing on the floor, and that is going to make the Celtics better, or at least be able to hold their own until Kemba Walker gets back and Romeo Langford gets back and the team is kind of made whole again. But at the same time, like, they could easily, Tatum's going to be seeing all sorts of double teams all year. Brown his shots I don't think are going to come as easily. And so you don't think, are either them taking a step back, at least in the short term, a possibility? Yeah. Like, that totally could happen just based on the roster construction right now. So honestly, I wouldn't put that, if that happens, I wouldn't really put that on them as much as like the environment around them. Exactly. Yeah. And that's a situation that, we'll see what, if Kemba comes back. I mean, this is going to be a season it's about the long game, because once you took those draft picks, once Kemba Walker got his stem cell injection, it became about the long game. So it's a matter, we'll see again how really good enough they are right now to really, if they still come out of January with, top 4, top 5 in the East, that's going to be super impressive to me.
So that in mind, playing the long game, this question for both of you. And, Evan and I have asked plenty of previous guests, how concerned are you about Kemba Walker's knee in the long term of this contract with the Celtics? And you can weigh in on that by all means, but more in the short term of this season, 72 game regular season. Don't worry about the playoffs. 72 game regular season with the mindset of getting him ready for the postseason. How many games does he play in this year? If I set the over under at 48, you taking the over or the under?
Under. Easy under. Because I don't think he's going to play back-to-backs when he's back. And they say he's going to, January is a target to come back. We'll see. Like, if he's dealing with anything, like, they're going to push that back to February. They're going to be extra careful because they need to be, because this is it. Like, if he can't get right this season, then that's not good for all sorts of reasons.
So 48 is an easy under, and I'm assuming Evan would agree with that, but tell me if I'm wrong about that, Evan. What number would you set on it?
Well, I like the under here, but to kind of bring this back to the previous point, it's very important that Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum have good control of this team and are able to go off to a good start, because if they can, you can delay the Kemba comeback a little bit more. Now, eventually Kemba's like, I want to play basketball, and the doctor's going to clear him and all that stuff. And that's going to be great. But you'd like to give Kemba as much time as humanly possible with this injury to come back, and make sure he's fully recovered, make sure that they dial him up very carefully. And Brad has talked about it, how they did it to start the bubble play. They didn't want to ramp up his minutes to 35 right away. They want to give him, sort of an escalator, so to speak. So to get back to that Jaylen and Jayson thing, it is imperative that those two get off to a great start and get this team clicking. I know their schedule right away is like, okay, you have the Bucks and the Nets to start. It's like, oh, great, perfect. You have two of the top teams you expect to be in your conference right from the jump. So again, look, this team is going to get off to somewhat of a rocky start. I think we all expect that. But when they hit January, hopefully they can create some distance between them and some other teams and win some games and give Kemba enough time to really heal, because this is, it's a short-term thing, but it is also a long-term thing here with Kemba. You have to keep that in mind. You have to keep him healthy for the next couple of years to get him through this contract. And, we talked with Dr. P 2 years ago about Kyrie's knee, and how there's going to be tendonitis in that knee. I mean, there's just no question about it. It's already there. And managing that is going to be something you have to do going forward. It's the same thing here with Kemba. Like, you have to treat that injury very carefully and very delicately. You can't ramp him up, otherwise he's just going to be gone. You won't be able to use him. And Kemba's game, because he's so short, is predicated on speed and shiftiness and elusiveness in tight spaces. And if he doesn't have that, this team, their ceiling drops dramatically. So I think it's under. I think B-Rob is right. I don't think they're going to play him in back-to-backs, at least not to start. Maybe towards the end of the season, if he's feeling more comfortable, sure. But I kind of don't expect to see him until February anyway. to be frankly honest with you. I think normally everybody's optimistic with timelines when it comes to injuries. On this one, I would lean more pessimistic.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So just to go back to what I was asking you before, Rob, what number would you put on it just for fun? If you think half a season, less than that?
Yeah, I'd say like 42. We'll
Yeah.
say he misses a month and a half before he comes back, period. And then there'll be sporadic, time off for the rest of the season.
All right.
Yeah, maybe don't play him against the Knicks or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, he thought about signing there anyway. We got a lot more to get to, including some of your questions that we were able to get off of Twitter. We'll get to those, little mailbag action toward the back half of the show. So, Rob, let's pick up with some of what we were just discussing in the midst of the BOL ad, which is, where does this team rank in relation to the rest of the conference? Never mind the NBA, but the conference, because as we know, plenty of teams around the Celtics improved. They've had their preseasons. We were able to dip in on those. Obviously got our first look at the Nets with Kyrie and with Durant, and Durant certainly looking like he hasn't missed a step after missing all of last year. Irving, for the most part, looked pretty good as well. So, where is this team, especially when you consider everything that we've talked about with regard to especially Kemba Walker's injury? Where are they in the pantheon of the Eastern Conference?
I think I'd put him right in the middle of the playoff picture right now, like 4 or 5. I think Brooklyn's ahead of them. I was kind of waiting on what Kevin Durant looked like before making that proclamation, but I've seen enough. That looks like Kevin Durant to me. I know it's just preseason, but like he's doing everything he wants to do, pretty close to the level he's probably used to doing it at. So you got them, you got Milwaukee. Who are healthy. I like the Drew Holiday edition. It's a kind of high risk, high reward for them, but they got Giannis back there, so they're not going to have distractions. They're going to be kind of in good shape. And Heat. I think Heat is the other team that I put just in front of them right now, based on, again, the moves they made this offseason. They lost a couple guys, but they also added some important pieces as well in terms of bench depth, and they have so much youth there. You expect all those guys to get better. And they don't have like a big injury like the Celtics do to start the year. So those three are there. And then you have, Philly, I think, is going to be right around that 4 or 5 spot. Indy, I expect to be kind of in that mix.
Raptors.
And yeah, it's Raptors too. Like that, those are all, like, we'll see. I don't expect all those teams to be good, but like, it's hard to tell right now which one of those teams is going to fall out of it, because from a talent level standpoint, they're all, I think, right there. So like, especially this version of the Celtics, when Kemba Walker comes back, that changes. But if the Celtics have this version of their team for the first 2 months of the season, then yeah,
we could be talking about a 7 or 8 seed.
Exactly. Like that's not far-fetched.
I want to get into the not even just the conference. So look at their division. Like, is the Atlantic Division the best division in basketball this year? You have the Celtics, Nets, Philly, in Toronto. Now I know the Knicks being there kind of levels them down a little bit, but you have 4 teams there that are all playoff worthy. Whether they make it or not, we'll see. Like with Toronto, I respect the hell out of Nick Nurse, Kyle Lowry and Siakam and OG Anunoby, losing both Gasol and Ibaka, tough. But, they still have a lot of championship pedigree there with those guys. Obviously, Brooklyn with Kyrie and KD, they're going to be the playoffs. It's a matter of what seed. And then you have the Sixers with Joel Embiid, Doc Rivers, Ben Simmons. They have a sort of a retooled roster, and Boston's right there. So, Boston's going to really have a dogfight this year in their division. They might not be totally used to it over the years, but this year I think that's the most competitive division in all of basketball, especially without question in the Eastern Conference. But the Western Conference is always stacked certain ways, and you have a bunch of guys out there that are going to compete for playoff spots. But that Eastern conference in that division specifically, Brian, I think it's going to be an absolute dogfight all the way through.
Yeah, I think it's a great point by you, because you're facing all those teams 4 times, and so that does not help. For the Celtics, their schedule's already going to be tough enough as is out of the gate, but they're probably going to have one of the tougher schedules front to back than any team in the East based off of that, divisional alignment. So it's, for a very long time, like the Western Conference was the superior conference. I think we're reaching a point now where if the East is not on even footing, they might even be better from like 1 to 8 in the playoff picture, at least, because there's some, especially if James Harden ends up in the Eastern Conference too, which looks like
right.
it could happen sooner rather than later.
Oh, I'm glad you brought him up because I'm sure you both saw this tweet from John Granato, who
really? Are we doing this?
We're going to do it from ESPN 97.5 in Houston. The man, if you read him on Twitter, he loves his wife, kids, golf, Coors Light, and poker, and no one is sure in what order, says, quote, an impeccable source, not just a source, an impeccable source, says the Raptors and the Celtics are the favorites right now for James Harden. It'd be a package for Pascal Siakam and more, or Jaylen Brown and more. Clearly the and more, because mathematically it just has to work that way. Let's, for a moment, entertain what I think is lunacy. I don't think the Celtics are in the mix for James Harden, but please, I invite both of you to tell me if I'm wrong about that. I'm not saying Danny Ainge hasn't or wouldn't inquire. I think that's, it's part of his makeup. It's also part of his job to do his due diligence. I just don't think it's a reality. I really do not. There's no part of me now. Granted, if you asked me this a couple of years ago, would I have thought Kyrie Irving was coming to Boston in August? The answer would have been no. So I will fully admit that, but I do not believe James Harden is coming to Boston. I don't think I think there was a better chance of the Patriots eking out a playoff spot this year when they had 2% odds than James Harden coming to Boston. And also just to, further respond to the tweet, I suppose. And I know plenty of people would disagree with me on this. This is just my belief. I don't think Danny Ainge would trade Jaylen Brown for James Harden. I really don't.
It depends what kind of James Harden you're like. If James Harden wants to come here, then yes, they do that trade. What's that?
Even for 1 year, like James.
Well,
Harden?
You got 2 years on his deal still.
Okay.
So you got 2 years and then a huge player option, which he may or may not give yet. So, I mean, it's not like a slam dunk. Like, obviously Jaylen's got 4 years left at a good price. His age matches up much better with Tatum than Harden does, obviously. But Jaylen Brown's a very good player. James Harden is a perennial
he's a
top
far
5
superior player. I just think if, it depends on what you're building toward. Are you really trying to win right now or next year? Then sure, you start to think about a James Harden more realistically in terms of Jaylen Brown. But if you're really trying to plan this next window out with Tatum and Brown as being your guys, it doesn't make sense.
Right. And so that's where, again, what's Harden's head, where's his head at? And that's like
strip club.
That's the track record says it's not in a good spot, and that's why the Celtics aren't gonna, offer what needs to be offered for them to get a deal done here. But yeah, like I do think that all reports are that the Celtics have done their due diligence and are not interested for that reason. And again, Kyrie Irving serving as kind of the warning tale, if you will, of trading for the star who has 2 years left on their deal. But has questions about, their character and things like that, or just like how, all the baggage he brought with him, and that we all saw how that turned out. So giving up Jaylen Brown for that, and I think honestly, it'd be a situation where it'd be Brown and Smart for a deal that the Rockets would actually take if you're going to make it. I don't think the Celtics will do that unless they think that Harden is, all in and happy to be here, which it sounds like would not be the case.
Yeah, that's the tough part. But the one thing I'll say this, I think people forget already that just a few years ago that if they don't go super cold from 3 or if Chris Paul is getting hurt, they likely, go toe-to-toe with the Warriors, maybe win that game 7, go on to the NBA Finals, and maybe win a championship. So you're talking about the Kevin Durant-led Warriors with Curry, Clay, and Dre. That's one of the best teams we've ever seen, and James went toe-to-toe with that team. So you're getting a way better player than Kyrie Irving. You're getting a head case, no question, but you're getting just a way better player. And Adam's point of, it kind of points to what window you're doing. Right? If you acquire James Harden, that means you're trying to win right now. And if you don't, you're more likely trying to play the long game. The thing with Harden is, with the exception of Brooklyn, the team that acquires James Harden acquires the best player on their team. And that I'll even throw that if Boston were to acquire James Harden would be their best player right from the jump. And I don't mean to disparage, people that love Tatum a lot. And Tatum's a great player, but Tatum's not quite there yet. I mean, he's a good defensive player, but the stuff that James Harden does on offense is unbelievable. Okay. If he went to Philly, he'd be the best player on Philly. If he went to Miami, he'd be the best player in Miami, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So whoever acquires him is probably acquiring their best player. And in a what is now an arms race in the Eastern Conference, Danny knows that you need star power to win. And again, I'm not advocating for trading for James Harden because I just don't think he fits what this team is. You know, he's not a defensive first player. Boston tends to like those guys, the guys that can play defense, you know, and kind of learn a little bit as they go. Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, Romeo Langford, all, I think, examples of that, where Smart could play defensively from day one. You know, he's a guy that stayed on the floor because he could play defense. Jaylen Brown came in and out. His minutes early on were spotty. You know, Romeo Langford, once everybody realized he could play defense, he saw a lot of time, and he started to kind of get comfortable out there. James Harden doesn't feel like that kind of player. That being said, he would be arguably the best player in the Eastern Conference. If he were to come East, he'd be the best player on your team. And if all you care about is winning a title, then you make that deal. And Danny knows that star players win in this league. He obviously has made trades for stars in the past, worked out with Kevin Garnett, didn't work out with Kyrie Irving. You know, if you're batting 500, that's not so bad. I don't think they match up on a deal, but if they were to do it, I think people would get on the James Harden train pretty quick because I think they would love the fact that he can score 30 a game very effortlessly.
It's kind of hard to believe that we've gone this far into the show without.
Oh, hold on, Kaufman. You gotta give me a take on something. You gotta have
I said that Danny Ainge wouldn't do it, and it's not the right guy.
No, but would you do it, Adam? This is my question.
No, I don't want James Harden. I think James Harden's a quitter. I think he's one of the greatest offensive players in the history of the NBA. I think he's incredibly lackadaisical, and the give a bleep meter is very low when it comes to the defensive side of the ball. I think that he had a lot of talent around him in Houston, not to say that they were up to the level of the, Golden States and some of the teams they had to compete with. Daryl Morey built those teams as best he could. He had a lot of talent around him, Russell Westbrook included, another prima donna, obviously, but, he couldn't never mind his game. His game was fine. He couldn't take the team to the next level. There are aspects of his game I can't stand, which are today's NBA in general. Like I just have no desire as a fan, like as a viewer of basketball on a daily basis. I have no interest in watching a guy who takes a dozen 3-pointers a game. That's not for me. It's not good looking basketball. It's just not pleasing to the eye. But obviously he hits a good chunk of them and he shoots a good percentage and he's going to keep doing it and he would keep doing it even if he didn't. I just don't. When I think about culture, when I think about influence, impact, grooming Tatum for, his next steps and plenty of people were panicked by the idea of Tatum learning at the heels of Kyrie Irving. Well, I kind of feel the same way about James Harden. That's just not a guy to me that I want to come in and, as you said, Evan, instantly be my best player and having everyone kind of kowtow to this guy. He got his way year after year after year in Houston and never in the grand scheme of things really won anything. Like 50-win seasons are great and you can have a whole bunch of them, but ultimately what are you remembered for? And he's, fair or unfair, kind of Charles Barkley-like, he's going to be remembered, at least as of now, for not winning.
Yeah, my point though is like if you go back a few years and you look at what he did against that Golden State series, I mean he's clearly capable of getting there. Yeah. And him and Chris Paul got very close to it. Could him and Tatum get that team close to it? The flip side is, and B-Rob I think touched on this, Smart's probably going if that's the deal. So can you get to a title with Harden and Tatum, but your roster and does Kemba fit on that team? Where does Kemba fit in the whole equation with Harden on the team? Because Kemba's a lead ball handler. Yeah. And what does Kemba get relegated to a sixth man, Brian? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, you can start Kemba and Harden together, but I mean, there's, like you said, that's the guys that are best with the ball in their hands. So it'd be great for managing it over 48 minutes and when like resting one of those guys when you need to. But yeah, would it be the perfect fit? It's certainly defensively, it would be quite the challenge in the backcourt if Kemba Walker and James Harden is your starting 1 and 2. So that, but at the same time, they could be good enough offensively in theory if Kemba's right, where it wouldn't matter. So that again, that's a situation where, and to be honest, guys, like I think if the Celtics do end up showing any interest here, I think what you also have to think about in the situation, like you don't even think of making a deal with this unless like Tatum is fully on board with it. I think that also comes down to that too, because you're not gonna, if you're not gonna bring in a guy that Tatum's not thrilled about in this situation when you just kind of handed him the keys to the franchise with this extension. So that's something that none of us probably are going to know until something does or doesn't happen.
Well, and you also, and B-Rob said this before, but just to kind of take it to the next level, you have to know, and I don't mean believe, like when the Celtics traded for Kevin Garnett, they believed he would fall in love with the culture and want to stay, and that happened. They believed the same of Kyrie Irving, and it didn't happen. You have to know, which is more than believing, based on what you'd be giving up, 2 of 3 guys who are really part of your core. And I know Smart is not Tatum or Brown. Don't confuse what I'm saying, but the guy is valuable. People like to argue whether or not he's part of your core. He's part of your core. So if you're giving up 2 of the 3 guys who are part of your core, sorry, Kemba, but really it's a 3-man core, really, when you're talking about the here and now and the future. Kemba's not the future. Smart is still young enough to be part of the future. If you're giving up 2 of the 3 pieces who really resemble what you view your core to be, you got to know James Harden is invested in being here and wants to be here for the long term, not just coming in on a rental and seeing how he feels about the place. And I don't think, I just don't see how you could possibly even get that kind of answer from him, other than the fact he just knows he doesn't want to be in Houston anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that would be something where you have to, behind the scenes, figure that out, talk to the right people through intermediaries, and then figure out where he stands on it. And I have no doubt if the Celtics have real interest, like they'll do that. I mean, with Garnett, it was a totally different situation. Like they got an extension as they traded for him. So that was, he was signed, sealed, and delivered. That's not going to be possible here based on Harden's current contract. You're not going to be able to tack on more years. So you're going to be going on it like kind of flying blind like they were with Kyrie.
And you're talking about, if you're going to compare KG and James Harden, I mean, you're talking about a guy, Kevin Garnett, who might be the most loyal guy like in NBA history, or at least in recent memory. Yeah. That guy is loyal to probably several faults.
Anything.
Right. He does.
Yeah. But, I mean, you can't compare those guys. That's just from a contractual comparison.
Yeah. It's just different. But you're right though. You have to, when you trade for James Harden, you're mortgaging several things. You might be mortgaging your culture along with it. Right. And in trading Marcus Smart, you're trading a ginormous part of the culture. Like Smart's the longest tenured Celtic at this point. And it feels a little weird to say that, but also we've grown with him a little bit. But he brings that same, sort of defensive intensity that KG brought when he changed everything, back in 2008. So you're losing a big part of your culture when you trade Marcus Smart. And I think the Celtics really value that. And again, I love James Harden. I'm like one of the few people that enjoys watching him play because I like the chess match that he brings. Some of the stuff that he does drives me absolutely crazy, but I understand he's a very talented player. But at the end of the day, I don't think Boston should do this. And I've waffled on this, and I will admit this, and I've waffled on this. At first, I was all for this because I thought, James Harden coming over is just from a talent perspective is a no-brainer. But some of the stuff that you see from a chemistry standpoint, and is he the right fit? Like things that Boston actually should care about, you have to consider. And when you factor all that stuff in, I just think I think it's a bad fit for James Harden. I think wherever he goes, unless he goes to maybe Brooklyn, which I am praying to the basketball gods, the Kyrie for James Harden trade happens because it will melt down the internet. The internet will melt down. No, you can't. No, because if Brooklyn can't be any offer that Philly throws out there unless they put Kyrie on the table. You're not. Ben Simmons is just a much more attractive piece than anything that Brooklyn has to offer unless it's Kyrie. And even then, I still think I want Ben Simmons more than I want Kyrie Irving because I think I can build a much better team around Simmons than I can Kyrie Irving. But if it's financially whatever, and if you're Tillman Fertitta trying to get, some sort of financial advantage and maybe save some money, maybe the Kyrie thing's a thing. But I would absolutely die if at the end of the day, Kyrie gets traded for James Harden because the internet and Twitter it'll be the best day in Twitter history. I guarantee it.
Here comes another media blackout by Kyrie Irving.
Love it.
We haven't really, even in the interest of time, there's still some things I want to get to in the next 10 minutes or so before we're done. But one of them, we haven't even really talked about the rookies at all. And obviously these first rounders, Aaron Nesmith and Peyton Pritchard. If you would ask me, Robb, I think this is probably true for all three of us, but definitely me. If you would ask me back when they were drafted, draft night, which guy is going to be more impactful to start the season of these two, far and away it would have been Nesmith. I wouldn't give him that a second thought, but everything that has, come out since, whether it's what we've seen in games, the way these guys are talked about, the way it sounds as though based on coaches, teammates, that they're kind of getting up to speed and getting comfortable. Seems like Pritchard is the guy, at least out of the gate, that is going to serve a larger role. That says nothing of the entire season and for the future of their NBA careers. But, in these opening weeks of the season, seems like Pritchard's the one.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a need standpoint, it would have been better if Nesmith was that guy, just based on what the depth chart looks like. But I mean, he only played in college for a year and a half and then got hurt. So he's obviously hasn't played basketball since January in 5-on-5 situations competitively until this past week. So that it makes sense that why the learning curve would be a little bit longer for him right now versus a 4-year guy in Pritchard, who was one of the best players in college basketball last year. Like, when you draft a guy like that at the end of the first round, who's, upside may be limited, that's the other side of the coin is that, okay, he probably has a good chance of like being able to, come in right away and be what, the Celtics probably hoped like Carson Edwards would have been last year. So yeah, I mean, the buzz is real, like from just talking to people around the organization, from just hearing guys like Marcus Smart talk about Pritchard. And, for as good as he looked against the Sixers in spots, like I think we got, people got a dose of the reality, I should say, during that Nets game when, the 5 bench players rolled up against the Brooklyn starters in that third quarter. That did not go ugly from a variety of fronts. And Pritchard was one of them. Like that's part of the package there. He's not going to be world zero, but he's someone that I think defensively is further along than I thought he would be at this point. He seems pretty high Q on that end, which I think is big, which is going to get him on the floor. Especially if he shows he can, do okay against some wings that are a little bit bigger than him. And so for an offense that's going to be starved for production without Tatum on the floor, I think it's safe to say that Pritchard has earned at least a spot on the rotation most nights in the early going, it seems like.
I thought it was really staggering that the Philly game, and again, this is preseason, we're overreacting to 2 games, but that's the biz, folks. I thought it was unbelievable how Pritchard, in about 2 minutes, already took Carson Edwards and Tremont Waters and everybody else's like backup guy. Like, that was so obvious that he is just better than both those guys. And the size thing is where it glaringly kind of jumps out to me. Like, as much as I love watching, Tremont Waters at 5'9", go out there and navigate, his way around, you need to have size. And as smart as Tremont is, and he's super smart, and I think he'll be a great coach someday because I think he just sees the game differently than a lot of guys do. You need size, and Pritchard's size makes him a much more attractive player for the Celtics. I feel way more confident about their guard, the backup guard spots now that they've gone from Kemba, Smart, Wanamaker, and Tremont Waters to Kemba, Smart, maybe the best player not named Jayson Tatum in the preseason, Jeff Teague, and like they've obviously upgraded there. And I was thrilled to see that. In Nesmith on the flip side, I obviously want to see him just shoot a bunch of threes. But the other stuff on the floor, and again, as Brian mentioned, it's been a while since he's played 5-on-5. But as he got more comfortable, you could see the defensive stuff kind of come and go a little bit. He's a guy very active on the glass on both sides. His length is a problem on that end for a lot of people. The jump shot's going to come and go, and shooters are streaky, anyway. And as he gets more comfortable and more used to the NBA pace, I think he'll be better on that end. But the other stuff, little stuff that you want, competing defensively, competing on the glass, are things that I think are really great. And again, as this team gets healthier, you're going to rely on those 2 guys maybe a little bit more than you want you to start. But as this team gets healthier and they kind of fill in certain things, I could see both those guys being, solid players for this team, 9th, 10th guys down the road. The question is, if you're relying on your 9th and 10th guys, like how far you can really go.
All right, in our last 5-6 minutes here, I called for questions on Twitter, and I don't want to ignore them. We got about a dozen. We'll get to as many as we can, but let's go, reasonably rapid fire anyway, and not 2-word answers, but any quick thoughts that any of the three or all three of us have, we can mix them in. I think this one will be fairly quick. Brian, the director, says, do you think Ainge gets more help for the bench? I'd rather have Isaiah Thomas over half the guys we have now. Edwards turned out to be a bust. 2 quick thoughts on that. One, doesn't look good for Edwards right now. There's no doubt about that. I think it's a little premature to call him a bust, but it certainly doesn't look like he's anywhere close to contributing at an NBA level. That's for sure. He needs more minor league seasoning, and obviously the future of the G League in this pandemic situation is unclear. As far as IT, I get it, but there's a reason the guy doesn't have a job.
Yeah, you hope that someone gets there and he gets a shot somewhere this year. But to be honest, it's a long list of free agents that you'd think would get a shot this year that are still unsigned. So it's tough. And they're certainly, given once the depth chart at point guard here is very, very deep. So there's clearly not a spot for him on this roster at this point.
Yeah, it's a hard note to Isaiah Thomas, love him to death. And to just address the depth thing, I'm going to back up Ryan Bernardoni for a second. That TPE's got to get used this year because
100%.
Yeah, you got to use it. It'd be a failure to wait till next season to use it. Got to use it this year. Somebody to help out, score at the bench level. That's such a huge priority for them.
Well, from Rick, Horford returned via the TPE. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say he's in OKC and they've absorbed that bad contract. But building on that, fellas, let's quickly on the TPE, trade player exception, which is massive, nearly $30 million, as people know. And, you can't combine these things. So if you want to look up what players would even be mathematically available to the Celtics, look at anyone who earns less than $28.5 million, basically. Do you think this thing gets used before the trade deadline? Because we know it's not happening imminently. Do you think it gets used before the trade deadline? Do you think we're looking at next free agent or next offseason? Or do you think Danny actually doesn't use this thing?
They're 100% using it. You don't give up 2 second-round picks to get a trade exception and not use it. That would just be lunacy. When they use it, we'll see. I agree that this year, if you're serious about making a run, being competitive in the playoffs this year, and maybe that changes if Kemba's knee is not right and he's out for the year or something like that eventually. But if he's back, then you're using it. You're using the first 2 months to evaluate what you have on this roster, and then you see what teams fall out of it, and then you add a player, you add 2 players of it.
Yeah, I like Houston. I like Houston just because when they trade Harden, it's going to be a for sale sign there. And I keep coming back to Eric Gordon, and I know he's injury prone, but that's somebody that they could use off the bench for some firepower. You have to tell Eric Gordon, hey, by the way, you're coming off the bench. And he's done that a lot in his career for Houston, but they're going to need some firepower. I think Eric Gordon gives it to him. He can be okay defensively. Maybe the ball gets a little too stagnant when it gets in his hands, but it's something they can desperately use right there.
You've written extensively about the TPE and options available to the Celtics Beat, Rob. Who in your realistic wish list, I think it's important to frame it that way, so you couldn't say Giannis. Who in your realistic wish list, who's number 1 for the Celtics for you?
I think best case scenario for the Celtics this year is Orlando starts blowing it up if they fall out of the East race early, and Aaron Gordon becomes available. I think that's the price is, he only makes, I think, $18-19 million a year. He's under contract through next season. That's a guy who could be in your closing 5 as a stretch 5. So it fills in from that standpoint, fills in from a defensive versatility standpoint. And yeah, so it comes to price point. I think the hope from a Celtics standpoint is that some of these, smaller market teams that, everyone thinks they're in it right now, that's going to change in February and March. And then at that point, if you're the Celtics, you have to hope that teams are looking to dump money in the middle, like ownerships are looking to cut payroll. And so maybe the asking price on a guy like Gordon comes down a little bit than what it was at this point in the offseason, since they clearly, that core, something has to change with that core there, because that's been in place for a while and they have done nothing with it.
Celtics Live says, will there come a point if this core doesn't mesh this season, would they be open to trading away parts of it for a bigger piece? Tatum obviously being untouchable. I don't think we really need to spend time on this because we kind of already did. These guys believe that Jaylen Brown is more available than I do. When you start talking about a James Harden, for instance.
Well, yeah, for Harden. Yeah, I mean, it's
but that's the kind of bigger piece that I think this person's alluding to.
Yeah, and that's really about it, though. I'm not trading Jaylen Brown unless I'm getting a bona fide superstar back. And Harden's the only guy that kind of fits that description right now. But we'll see because, watch Minnesota. I don't know what. It's just a disaster out in Minnesota, probably. Watch out there. Watch some teams that have high-level players and can, get if they go south in a hurry, they can shake some to that tree and maybe land somebody. But, unless it's somebody really significant, I'm not trading Jaylen Brown for anybody.
From Brian, and I'll give this to Brian, predict the Celtics' most used rotation when everyone is healthy. So for the 6 games this year, that'll happen. Who do you like?
I mean, yeah, you got, I think Kemba, Smart, Brown, Tatum, Thompson are your starters. And then coming off the bench, you got Tice, you got Teague, you got Grant Williams. And then I think you got a wild card player X, whether that's Pritchard or Neesmith at that point in the year. Remains to be seen. And then to be honest, it's probably going to be traded player X. Because I think that's the veteran guy that comes in with the traded player exception at some point to fill in some of that gap at the bench.
So that's a best case scenario. Here's kind of a worst from Kevin. Who is your crunch time lineup for the Celtics going into the first week of games?
Smart, Brown, Tatum. That's easy. Whoever's got it going better on a certain night, Tice or Thompson, I think is your fourth. And then the fifth guys, I think we just spin a wheel because I think that's going to be your answer on any given night. It's going to like who's playing well, who are you playing, what are the matchups?
I got one. I got your normal, Brown and Tatum, no question. I'm going to throw Tristan Thompson in there if he's healthy. And I got 2 wild cards. I got 2 wild cards for you. Okay. I would play Grant Williams, and pinning the score, I would play Jeff Teague because you need offense. And I love Smart to death, but sometimes he just shoots too much, and I need a guy that's going to get the ball to where it needs to go. And Jeff Teague does that pretty well so far. So worst case scenario, I guess, is Teague, Brown, Tatum, Grant, and Tristan. But I think just as a ending note on that, just play Grant Williams more. He does a lot of good stuff.
But fellas, let's not count out from Jay. What blackmail does Shemi Ojale have on Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens?
They keep remembering this. That's it. That's a good time.
I understand the Ojale question. Like, again, he wouldn't have been on this roster probably if Hayward came back. Straight up. At the same time,
he's already said that,
right? And he's exactly. So that's it is what it is. Ojale would be fine as like if you're 12th, 13th, 14th man, just to use as a specialist. The problem is when you ask him to do more than that, and that's obviously has been the Celtics the last few years. And again, probably the first couple months of this season. So we'll see. He'll get his chances, but once he gets back to just a specialist role, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. And that's if you're going to have him at the end of the bench.
Darth says, is anybody else tired of Ainge drafting scrappy, e.g. undersized guys who can't shoot? Darth, that was the whole point of this draft. They drafted guys who historically can shoot.
Yeah, you literally got 2 of the best shooters in the draft. So that's again, we'll see if it translates to the NBA, but they certainly help themselves or should try to help themselves on that front.
Carson was supposed to shoot. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, very true. I feel like I'd be remiss to fail to mention, obviously, you mentioned before Gordon Hayward. We haven't even, I guess it's not relevant to us anymore, in this podcast, but, it feels, I don't know, somewhat pertinent. He's hurt again. And his Hornets career basically has not even started. The poor guy has fractured a finger. He's day to day, but obviously, missed the duration of the preseason. I have no idea, quite frankly, where he stands going into the regular season. Maybe you guys do, but he seems like a good guy. I don't know on any sort of personal level. He seems like a good guy. and obviously lucked himself into a mega contract. So no one's going to be crying poor, quite literally or figuratively, for Gordon Hayward. He's doing fine. But I do feel for him. I would like to see a resurgent year out of Gordon Hayward, and it's like he's still in Boston. It's picking up the wrong way.
Yeah, I you nailed it. Like it's a shame. You'd like to see what he can do if actually a healthy slate of games for once in the last 4 or 5 years of his career. But I mean, we'll see. It sounds like he might try to play through this, so hopefully it doesn't hold him back too much. But certainly not ideal to be starting your new home with a broken finger.
I feel bad.
Yeah,
that's all I got.
Pretty much what it is. Well, folks, games are starting, real games that matter, that actually count, on Wednesday, which is, again, for us right now, just a few days away. 7:30 first game against Giannis and the Bucks. And then Christmas Day, you got Kyrie Irving theoretically playing at the Garden in a game that actually counts. After he finishes spreading sage everywhere, he will play. He and Kevin Durant. No one will be there to watch. So does a game actually happen? Yes, it will be televised. So theoretically, and I expect he will be out there playing this game against a former team, something that has not happened in years. And then back-to-backs, not days-wise, but games in Indiana to mark that first road trip, the 27th and 29th. And then it's back home and on to Detroit for a couple of games and so on and so forth, getting us into January. So it's going to be a jam-packed, top-heavy, condensed schedule that Brad Stevens and others have talked about. It's going to be interesting. It's going to give us a whole lot to talk about. And I'm just, I'm excited that it's coming back. Basketball's on the way and it matters again.
I'm so pumped. So pumped.
All right, good stuff. B-Rob, thank you so much for hopping on. Remember, B-Rob is not just a friend of ours who, has been kind enough for years to hop on this show. He also has a podcast of his own as part of the CLNS Media Network. That is the Winning Plays podcast with Michael Pina, who is, the man is just, he writes everywhere, and he's got another new gig, and Rich Levine, part of that show still. And so make sure you check those guys out. Anything that people should know as far as checking out the Winning Plays show?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have a season preview episode coming up probably by Tuesday here, so stay tuned for that. And weekly might go up to 2 episodes all year long, so in the middle of the week. Wow. So should be fun listening all year.
Show off.
Shout out to Pina, Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, SI, Mr. SI, Michael Pina.
Way to go, buddy.
Just remember, because we've just done a season preview show, listen to this one before you listen to B-Rob's. That's all. Listen to them both.
No, you can listen to them both. You're going to listen to this one on Monday and then listen to Winning Plays Tuesday. That'd be good.
Yeah, listen to them both. Just listen to this one first because it came out first, and then listen to B-Rob's, and you get the hashtag Peanut perspective coming at you. It's gonna. I
like that.
Great. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Enjoy everybody else. Have a very happy holiday season. Obviously, if you celebrated Hanukkah, hope it was a wild 8 crazy nights for you. And on to Christmas, just a few days away. Have a very Merry Christmas. Most importantly, be safe and just enjoy all the family time before the new year comes around. Basketball is approaching, folks. We will be back with you coming up in a matter of days as well to look back, reflect, and look forward and enjoy and all of that good stuff. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.